Hello, my name is Samantha Marshall, and I thought my 34th birthday would be a celebration of everything I'd built on my own. Instead, I sat at the head of the table and unwrapped the cruelest gift imaginable, an eviction notice from my own family for the very house my grandmother entrusted to me. They believed I was powerless, that I'd simply hand it all over, but they underestimated how far I'd go to protect what was rightfully mine. If this kind of story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Let's begin. On my 34th birthday, I woke up in the house my grandmother left me, my safe haven, my pride, my entire history. By nightfall, that house would become a battlefield. The November air was crisp, carrying the last scent of autumn leaves through Evelyn's stained glass windows. Light spilled across the hardwood painting, familiar colors on the floor. This house wasn't just lumber and stone. It was the one constant in a life where family had always been unpredictable. Evelyn had raised me here, filling empty weekends with baking lessons and stories about how roots mattered more than branches. She used to say, "This house holds more than walls, Samantha. It holds our soul." I repeated those words to myself as I walked through the rooms, believing them still. My business had grown steady design contracts, boutique renovations, a hotel lobby on the horizon. I had built everything from scratch, unlike the rest of my family who had grown used to shortcuts. My father, Richard, was still chasing wins at 65, gambling debts mounting with every failed promise. My mother, Eleanor, floated between galas and shopping sprees, dressing her declining credit as elegance. Brandon and Rachel were broke after their fitness chain collapsed. They now lived rent-free in the pool house. And Lily, my youngest sister, carried student loans she couldn't pay on an art history degree no one hired for. When Evelyn's will left the house to me, resentment bloomed. They never forgave that choice. I tried to be generous, letting Brandon and Rachel stay covering part of Lily's loans, even loaning Dad money he never returned. I told myself it was family duty. Still, I saw how they looked at the house, not as memory, but as money trapped in wood and glass. The night before my birthday dinner, we gathered around the table. I had cooked Evelyn's rosemary chicken and set her best china. The house glowed with warmth, but beneath it I sensed a chill. Brandon spoke loudly about new job prospects. Rachel flattered my decor with that false tone she always used. Eleanor laughed at nothing in particular, sipping wine like she was auditioning for an audience. Lily barely looked at me, her eyes tired. Only Richard seemed distracted, glancing at his phone between bites. Halfway through the meal, he slipped into the hall. His voice carried through the thin wall as I cleared plates. "She doesn't need to know until it's done," he muttered, low but certain. My hands froze on the porcelain. The words didn't belong to golf buddies or clients. They belonged to someone making plans without me. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly louder than the voices in the dining room. My father returned a moment later, smiling too quickly. "Just a tea time tomorrow," he said, sliding his phone away. Nobody else noticed the lie, or maybe they chose not to. I sat back at the table, listening to their laughter scrape against the walls Evelyn had fought to preserve. My chest tightened with a truth I couldn't name yet but felt in my bones. Something was moving beneath the surface, and I was the last to be told. What exactly are they hiding from me? Once you notice the whispers, you can't stop hearing them. I carried those words in my head like a warning bell. 2 weeks before my birthday, I began catching fragments. Doors half closed. Voices muffled sudden silence when I stepped into a room. My mother's embrace that week replayed in my mind. "Darling, the house is too big for one person." She had pressed the words against my ear with a smile too polished, like a stage cue rather than affection. I brushed it off at the time. Now it rang with intent. One Thursday, I came home earlier than planned. A realtor stood in my living room, tape measure stretched across Evelyn's mantle camera, slung at her side. She froze when she saw me. "Just preliminary work," she stammered, gathering her notes. "Your family asked me." She cut herself short and vanished through the door before I could answer. My stomach sank. The house smelled of dust, disturbed by strangers, of intrusion that shouldn't have happened. Later that evening, Grace Walker, my neighbor with a gardener's patience and a sharp ear, appeared at the gate. Her eyes darted toward the street before she leaned close. "I shouldn't meddle," she whispered, which meant she was about to. But I saw your parents' brother and that lawyer fellow in your garden yesterday. They were pacing the property lines, talking about tear-down value and cash offers. She gripped her tote bag until the fabric wrinkled. I heard your father say she doesn't need to know until it's done. Grace's words fit too neatly with what I had overheard days earlier. My chest tightened, the kind of pressure that precedes a storm. I called Benjamin Cohen the next morning. He had handled contracts for my design business, but more importantly, he had known Evelyn. In his quiet office papers stacked with surgical precision, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he adjusted his glasses. Your grandmother's will was ironclad. They can't undo it legally, but people desperate for money do reckless things. Don't confront them yet. His gaze sharpened. Document everything. Receipts, records, conversations. If possible, discreet recordings. Let them think they're winning until we have proof. I left his office with a cold determination. That night, I purchased a set of discreet cameras and tucked them into corners of the living room and hall. I set my phone to auto-record calls and collected receipts in a separate folder. Each small act felt like slipping on armor. A few days later, Brandon sat on the porch phone pressed to his ear, oblivious to my presence inside. His voice carried through the screen door. The developer is ready. As soon as she's out, they'll level it and cut us our shares. My pulse thudded in my throat as I pressed record. His words went into my archive, another nail for their coffin, but nothing prepared me for what came next. Brandon left his laptop open one afternoon while he and Rachel argued in the kitchen. I walked past, intending to ignore it, but a folder on the screen caught my eye. Eviction draft. My hand hovered, then clicked. Lines of legal language filled the page. Tenant to vacate within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in forcible removal. My name glared back at me, framed as the obstacle. My vision blurred, chest ice cold. 30 days. They weren't whispering anymore. They were preparing the weapon. What stared from the screen was clear and merciless. Effective in 30 days. The candles on my cake flickered their glow, no match for the shadows circling the table. The dining room was dressed as if for a magazine spread. Evelyn's china gleamed under the chandelier. Her crystal glasses caught the light in fractured rainbows. And the lasagna I baked filled the air with rosemary and cheese. Yet the warmth felt staged, the laughter too practiced. My family drifted in one by one, bearing gifts that revealed more about themselves than about me. Eleanor leaned in with a perfume-clouded kiss. Darling, happy birthday. The house looks lovely, though much too grand for just one. She handed me a silk scarf, her taste, not mine. Richard followed with a stiff hug, envelope tucked conspicuously in his pocket. Brandon and Rachel swept in with champagne and exaggerated cheer. The birthday girl, Brandon announced too loudly, his grin stretched thin. Rachel squeezed me in a hug, whispering, You deserve the best tonight, the emphasis chilling. Lily arrived last, clutching a small package, her eyes damp as if she'd been crying. She pressed a vintage brooch into my hand and quickly sought refuge in her glass of wine. Dinner carried on in a haze of surface-level chatter. Brandon bragged about celebrity clients he supposedly trained. Eleanor recounted gossip from her circle, while Richard chuckled about golf games. Not once did anyone ask about my design projects. They poured wine generously, laughed too easily, filling the air with a noise that felt like camouflage. I chewed slowly, watching them with the detachment of someone recognizing a script she hadn't agreed to. When the plates were cleared and the cake brought out, I leaned into the small comfort of Evelyn's recipe, the one she'd baked for me every year until she passed. We sang, the candles wavered, and I made a silent wish for truth to reveal itself. Richard tapped his glass. Now for our special gift. Everyone contributed. He held up the envelope I had noticed earlier, lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He passed it to me across the table, the weight of it oddly light. My fingers slid the flap open, pulling free a single sheet. Legal language filled the page. Words like eviction, vacate premises, and 30 days burned into my vision. The room hushed, waiting for my reaction. What is this? My voice barely rose above a whisper. Richard cleared his throat. We've been patient, Samantha, but this house, this asset, is worth over $2 million. Divided among us, it solves everyone's problems. Eleanor leaned in smoothly. Your grandmother would have wanted the whole family taken care of, not just you. Brandon's tone turned sharp. You've had the exclusive benefit for years. It's time to share. Rachel nodded, eyes bright with greed. I looked around the table, seeing the naked hunger behind each face. Lily stared at her lap, silent shame radiating from her stillness. My pulse hammered, but my expression held steady. I folded the paper carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and set it down beside my plate. I need a moment. My voice came calm, surprising even myself. Their faces shifted, Richard's impatient scowl, Eleanor's warning hiss, Brandon's mocking smirk. None of them noticed my hand slip beneath the tablecloth to my phone. My thumbs moved quickly, sending a single message to Benjamin. They did it. Plan B. They thought the eviction notice was their checkmate. They didn't know I'd been playing a different game all along. I closed the dining room door behind me, the envelope still burning in my palm, and walked straight to my office. The glow of the desk lamp spilled over the oak surface, casting long shadows across the bookshelves Evelyn had once lined with history and poetry. My heart was steady now. This moment wasn't panic. It was execution. I knelt before the safe hidden behind a paneled section of wall, punched in the code, and swung the door open. Inside waited months of preparation, each folder and envelope meticulously labeled. Receipts of every repair I had paid for tax records with my signature on every line, proof of historical filings Evelyn had trusted me to maintain. I drew out Evelyn's journal, her looping handwriting spelling out the reasons she left the house to me, her warnings about my parents' hunger for quick money. Next came pawnshop slips that proved Lily had sold off family heirlooms. I placed them carefully on the desk, a lineup of weapons sharper than any blade. Benjamin's voice replayed in my mind our meeting weeks earlier at a quiet cafe on the corner of Elm Street. The air had smelled of burnt espresso, his calm words cutting through my dread. Let them think they're winning. Document everything. The law is slow, but evidence is faster than greed. I had left that cafe with my pulse finally steady because I understood this wasn't about reacting. It was about waiting. The waiting had been unbearable at times. Grace had helped. One afternoon, she'd invited me into her garden, pretending to show me late roses while her hands trembled over the affidavit she had just signed. Her memory of Richard's voice. She doesn't need to know until it's done was now captured in black ink, notarized and ready. She had patted my hand afterward, her eyes clear. Your grandmother trusted me to watch this house. I won't fail her now. I spread the files across the desk, arranging them by category: legal, financial, testimonial. The recordings I had saved from Brandon's careless calls were copied to 3 drives. On one, his words dripped with arrogance. The developer's ready. Once she's gone, we're rich. Now that arrogance was mine to wield. The phone buzzed, jolting me. A message from the developer's number glared across the screen. Too risky. We're out. My lips curved into the first real smile of the evening. Their supposed golden buyer had backed out. Without a developer, their scheme collapsed like a house of cards. They had cornered me with an eviction notice, but I had already cut the strings to their puppet master. The desk looked like a war table now. Evidence lined up, truth polished and undeniable. Evelyn's journal rested at the center, her words anchoring me. Samantha understands the soul of this house. Then the doorbell rang sharp and decisive, echoing through the Victorian halls. I didn't flinch. I knew who it was. Benjamin stood outside with a briefcase full of paper, the sound of his knock like the tolling of a bell announcing the beginning of the end. Tonight, they wanted me out of the house. Instead, I showed them the door. When I stepped back into the living room, the birthday cake sat, untouched candles melted into crooked wax towers. My family lounged in forced comfort, their eyes sharp with expectation. Richard's fingers drummed on the arm of his chair, Eleanor's smile carved into porcelain. Brandon and Rachel clutched each other like co-conspirators waiting for the curtain to rise. Lily sat off to the side, her glass of wine untouched, shoulders trembling. I carried a leather portfolio under my arm. Setting it on the coffee table, I met each gaze in turn. Since we're exchanging documents tonight, I said evenly, I thought I'd bring some of my own. One by one, I slid sealed envelopes across the table, each name written on the front in bold script. Richard tore his open first. his face drained as casino ledgers and IOUs spilled across his lap. A small recorder played his voice desperate and raw. "Front me another 10 grand, I'll cover it when the house sells." The color rose in his neck as he snapped the device shut. "You had no right." Eleanor gasped when she unfolded her own packet copies of credit card statements, each account opened fraudulently in my name. Identity theft is a felony. Benjamin's voice cut through the room as he entered, crisp suit gleaming security guards at his back. "The police have already been notified." Eleanor's painted lips faltered, her composure cracking for the first time. Brandon and Rachel's folder contained forged mortgage documents and contracts pledging my house as collateral for their defunct business. Brandon stammered. "These are fabrications." But Benjamin interrupted smoothly. "Not according to the investors who have already filed claims against you. They were very eager to cooperate." Rachel's hands shook as she tried to push the papers back into the envelope as if hiding them would erase the crime. Lily's packet was thinner. Pawn slips and photographs of Evelyn's missing heirlooms stared back at her. She covered her mouth, tears streaming silently. Unlike the others, her guilt didn't wear arrogance, it was raw regret, but the evidence was no less damning. The silence thickened until I broke it. "You gave me an eviction notice. I'm giving you justice." My words landed like a gavel, final and cold. At that moment, the knock on the door rattled the walls. A man stepped in, flanked by 2 enforcers, his expression hard. He carried a folder of his own, Brandon's debts to private lenders. "Time's up," he said flatly. Brandon's bravado collapsed into begging stammers. Rachel shrank beside him, clutching his arm as if she could vanish into his shadow. Chaos erupted. Richard blamed Eleanor for pushing too far. Eleanor hissed that Brandon had been reckless. Brandon shouted that Rachel had insisted, and Rachel wept that she had only followed orders. Their empire of whispers had turned into a spectacle of blame. Benjamin stood unmoved, the security team ensuring none of them laid a hand on me. I watched the implosion, the tangle of accusations, the frantic clawing for excuses. Then I rose steady and unshaken. My eyes met theirs one by one before I spoke. "You wanted me gone. But tonight it's you who will leave." By the end of that night, I had no family left inside these walls, but for the first time, it truly felt like mine. 6 months later, the Victorian stood taller than ever. May sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows Evelyn had loved, throwing jeweled patterns across floors I had refinished with my own hands. The dining room where betrayal had once been served like dessert had been transformed into a bright art studio. Canvases lined against the walls, students' sketches taped with pride. The pool house was gone. In its place, a meditation garden bloomed with lavender and stone paths. The house no longer whispered of ambushes, it breathed again. I had changed the locks the very next morning, and with each passing day, I changed something else. Eleanor's cold voice no longer haunted the parlor. Richard's bitterness no longer stained the air. The echoes of Brandon and Rachel's entitlement had been silenced. What remained was mine to rebuild. Lily's return had been tentative, her figure hesitant at the threshold months ago. She came with conditions I laid down firmly, a job repayment for what she had sold, no contact with the rest of them. To my surprise, she had honored every word. She found steady work at a bookstore, reclaimed 2 of Evelyn's heirlooms from pawn, and made small payments toward the rest. Trust wasn't instant, but step by step she stitched something fragile back between us. Now in the garden, Evelyn once called her sanctuary tables, draped in linen, held lemon tarts, sparkling drinks, and fresh roses. Friends mingled with colleagues, donors with students. The Evelyn Foundation was no longer an idea. In my notebook, it had become a scholarship fund and mentorship program for young designers who had talent but no resources. Cameras clicked as local journalists captured the transformation, not just of the house, but of its spirit. Benjamin raised a glass, his voice warm. "Tonight we celebrate resilience, not just of a home, but of a woman who turned betrayal into legacy." Applause rippled through the garden, but my eyes sought Grace, who approached with a small wrapped box. Inside lay a silver key, antique and gleaming. "This belonged to your grandmother," she said softly. She called it the key to discernment, knowing when to open and when to lock. I closed my fingers around it, feeling Evelyn's presence as if she stood with us beneath the oak trees. As twilight settled lanterns glowing against branches heavy with spring leaves, I slipped inside to my study. A single envelope waited on the desk, my mother's handwriting curling across its face. I opened it slowly. Manipulation bled from every line, pleas about family veiled guilt, questions about the value of the house. The old hooks no longer caught. I tore the letter clean in half, then in half again, dropping the pieces into the wastebasket. Through the window, laughter carried from the garden. I looked out at the people gathered, Grace, Benjamin, Lily, carefully balancing trays, students leaning over sketches, and felt something Evelyn had always promised this house could hold peace. The silver key glinted in my palm as I whispered, justice was finally restored, and those who once believed they could strip away a legacy were forced to face the weight of their own deceit. The story proves that injustice may thrive for a season, but the truth once revealed shatters even the strongest illusions of power. When betrayal meets resilience, it is not the schemers who write the last line, but the one who dared to stand unbroken. Like a locked door finally swinging open, justice arrived not just as retribution, but as liberation. If you felt the weight of this story, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you too know what it means to stand against betrayal.